Have you ever wondered if what you think you know about women is actually true? Not the surface stuff, the clichés, the stereotypes, but the deeper, more uncomfortable realities that often get swept under the rug. Because let me tell you, what we believe about someone as complex as a woman can sometimes be a house built on sand. And when that foundation shakes, everything falls apart. I'm not here to burst bubbles just for the thrill of it. There's something liberating about facing truths that unsettle us. So, if you're ready to challenge some illusions and maybe learn a bit more about yourself in the process, let's dive in. I still remember a conversation from a chilly March evening in 2023 when I met with Anna, a psychologist from Lisbon who specializes in relationship dynamics. We talked for hours over strong black coffee so bitter it matched the discomfort of the topic we tackled. Anna shared how many people she worked with clung to outdated ideas about women that ultimately hurt both parties in relationships. She said something that stuck with me. We project expectations onto women like we do onto mirrors, expecting them to reflect exactly what we want, but often they show us back something entirely different, and it makes us angry. That moment felt like a crack opening up in my own assumptions. This brings me to one of the first inconvenient truths. Women are not monolithic or predictable beings designed to fit into neat psychological boxes. Jung's exploration of archetypes, the recurring symbols and roles we all carry unconsciously, shows us that while certain patterns exist across humanity, they are never one size fits all. The archetype often associated with women, the anima, representing femininity within the collective unconscious, isn't a fixed mold but a dynamic constellation of traits that varies wildly between individuals. To make this more concrete, imagine Maria, a 29-year-old software developer living in Brooklyn. Maria is introverted and deeply analytical but also expresses herself through dance and poetry during her rare free moments. Now, picture someone who believes all women should be nurturing caretakers or relentlessly empathetic emotional anchors. That stereotype would clash dramatically with Maria's reality. She might feel misunderstood or pressured to perform an emotional role she doesn't naturally inhabit. This disconnect isn't just frustrating, it can lead to miscommunication and even self-alienation. Here's where things get even trickier. Society conditions us from early on to expect certain behaviors based on gender norms that are often unexamined and rigid. Jung emphasized that these inherited patterns create an inner tension because they conflict with our authentic selves beneath layers of social conditioning. Women, like all people, navigate this tension daily, trying to reconcile who they truly are with who others expect them to be. If you're thinking this sounds like common sense, you'd be right, but acknowledging it is just the first step. What happens next is usually uncomfortable because it forces us out of our comfort zones. Let me share an exercise you can try anytime you interact with someone you identify as female, or honestly anyone whose behavior puzzles or frustrates you. Pause before making assumptions about their motives or feelings based on gender expectations. Instead, ask yourself, what am I assuming here? Could this person's experience be different from my expectation? Imagine listening without preparing your response first, just holding space for ambiguity. A practical way to do this might look like this. Next time you catch yourself thinking, she should be more understanding, or women always react emotionally, stop and rewrite that thought internally as a question. What if she sees things differently? What if her reaction has reasons I don't yet understand? I remember trying this once during an argument with my sister Clara last summer in Sao Paulo. One of those heated discussions where words feel like sharp objects. Instead of spiraling into frustration, I forced myself to step back mentally and consider her perspective without jumping to conclusions based on typical gender roles I had unconsciously assigned her. It didn't magically fix everything, spoiler. No magic fixes, but it opened a new channel for dialogue where both of us felt heard rather than boxed in. This isn't about excusing harmful behavior or avoiding accountability. It's about recognizing how much our preconceived notions shape our interactions, and how freeing it can be when we loosen those chains even slightly. And speaking of preconceived notions, I have to say if this perspective resonates with you so far, subscribing to the channel might be worth your while because there's much more ahead that challenges common myths without falling into oversimplifications. Back to Jung for a moment. He described psychological growth as becoming conscious of unconscious biases and integrating parts of ourselves that society may deem unacceptable or strange. For women navigating their identities under societal pressures, Whether related to career ambitions conflicting with traditional family roles or dealing with internalized expectations around appearance and emotion, this integration is crucial yet complicated. So here's another practical tip connected to this truth. If you identify as female, or anyone grappling with these tensions, start journaling moments when you feel torn between what others expect and what feels true inside. Note any emotions that come up: shame, anger, confusion, and instead of dismissing them, try naming them clearly on paper without judgment. Why? Because putting these feelings into words begins dismantling unconscious barriers between your public self and private experience, a subtle but potent act toward wholeness. I want to stress something here. Not every woman will experience these contradictions the same way. Some might find societal norms comforting or affirming rather than stifling at times. The key isn't fitting into one narrative but being honest enough with oneself not to settle for imposed identities at the cost of authenticity. Returning briefly to Anna's work, it struck me how many clients she described who suffered silently simply because their partners assumed women are naturally intuitive, or women know how they should behave. It reminded me painfully of my own failed attempts at communication when I relied too heavily on those assumptions instead of asking open questions. And since life rarely offers neat packages, well, relationships are messy systems filled with unpredictability, not unlike weather patterns shifting unexpectedly over familiar cities like New York or Lisbon. So maybe it helps to think less in terms of absolute truths about women and more about embracing complexity, the messy middle ground where real understanding happens. Before moving on, and there is much more coming, try this small experiment over the next few days. Whenever you hear yourself generalizing about women as emotional, nurturing, irrational, pause and check whether your statement reflects personal experience or cultural script repeated mindlessly. It won't always feel comfortable. Resistance tends to rise when old beliefs get questioned. But discomfort often signals growth edges worth exploring quietly within ourselves first before bringing them outwardly into conversations. And hey, if these reflections spark something inside you now or later down the road, feel free to share your thoughts below because stories help unravel shared illusions better than facts alone ever could. Anyway, time flies when diving into such topics, and I'm eager for what comes next because there are plenty more inconvenient truths waiting just around the corner that will keep shaking up assumptions we hold tight without even realizing it. But for now, let's sit with this first truth. Women cannot be reduced to simple categories dictated by social expectations or unconscious projections resting beneath awareness. They are multifaceted human beings navigating worlds both internal and external with unique complexities no single idea can capture fully. And recognizing this is not defeat but invitation. To meet people as they really are rather than shadows cast by myths lingering far too long in collective imaginations. That might sound heavy today. But trust me, the lightness comes later after facing what feels heavy now. See? That metaphor sneaked in. Anyway, enough for step 1. For now at least, but I hope this gives some food for thought amidst your day-to-day chaos, or quiet moments. Commenta I sua experiencia se alguma dessas ideas toku voce de alguma forma e fique vontade para perguntar se algo fico confuso ou se quiser exemplo mais específico de como praticar essa pausa antes do julgamento na sua rotina diária. Pequeno gesto que pode fazer uma diferença surpreendente nas relações que voce tem com mulheres ao seu redor, ou eu consigo mesmo. And yes, in case you're wondering, there's much more ahead that digs deeper without tripping over clichés or simplistic answers, so sticking around could bring clarity where confusion once reigned. But let me stop rambling here before I turn this opening section into an essay nobody has time for, including myself. So, thanks for sticking through this part. I appreciate your curiosity already showing through your attention span. Next time we'll explore another truth lurking beneath surface impressions. One that challenges popular ideas about control and vulnerability among women. And trust me, it does not go gently into easy explanations either. Till then, take care out there, and keep questioning what seems obvious. Sometimes that's where transformation quietly begins. So, picking up where we left off, let's venture into a territory that might initially feel a bit unsettling but is crucial to grasp if we want to move beyond illusions. You see, the second inconvenient truth about women, and honestly, about anyone, is that vulnerability is not a weakness but a complex form of strength that society often misinterprets. Now, I know this sounds like something you'd hear in a self-help seminar or scroll past on Instagram with an eye roll. But bear with me, there's more beneath the surface. I was talking recently with Elena, a 42-year-old nurse from Chicago who has worked through some of the toughest moments during the pandemic. She shared how patients and colleagues alike expected her to be this unbreakable figure, someone who could absorb pain and trauma without flinching. But what she found was paradoxical. Opening up about her own struggles didn't make her less capable. It made connections deeper and restored her sense of humanity amid chaos. This reminds me how women are often caught between contradictory societal demands. They must be resilient caretakers yet also emotionally available in ways that sometimes feel impossible to sustain simultaneously. Jung's writings hint at this tension when he discusses the anima and animus as not just psychological constructs but lived experiences shaped by culture and personal history. What complicates matters further is that vulnerability gets dressed up in cultural costumes, seen as emotional fragility, irrationality, or even manipulation when expressed by women, while similar expressions by men might be framed as courage or authenticity. This discrepancy creates a double bind where women may hesitate to show true vulnerability out of fear it will be weaponized against them or dismissed outright. To ground this in something tangible, think about Sophie, a 36-year-old architect in Melbourne. Sophie recently found herself overwhelmed juggling demanding projects at work and family expectations at home. When she admitted feeling exhausted and unsure about asking for help, her immediate reaction was guilt, not because she wasn't capable but because she feared being labeled weak or less competent. It took several conversations with trusted friends before Sophie realized that sharing vulnerability actually invited support rather than judgment. If you find yourself nodding along, or maybe shaking your head thinking, easier said than done, here's an exercise worth trying. Next time you sense reluctance to express difficulty or uncertainty, pause and ask yourself what story you're telling about vulnerability in that moment. Are you equating it automatically with weakness? Could it possibly be the doorway to connection? Try journaling about recent times you held back from sharing worries or fears due to perceived expectations around strength. Then reflect on what might have happened if you'd allowed yourself that openness instead. It's okay if this feels awkward or even scary. Such feelings are often signs we're stepping outside habitual patterns that served us poorly anyway. And here's something else. This exercise isn't just for individuals identifying as women. Anyone can benefit from examining how vulnerability gets misunderstood and masked behind social scripts and unconscious biases. Speaking of masks, I can't help but think about how these themes played out during the global shifts we've all witnessed lately. From remote work blurring boundaries to increased awareness around mental health sparked by recent world events in 2024. Suddenly, many of us had no choice but to confront vulnerabilities previously hidden beneath professional facades or daily routines. Now imagine if more spaces existed where expressing vulnerability was normalized, not met with judgment or dismissal, but seen as part of being human regardless of gender expectations. This shift is slow but crucial because it challenges deeply ingrained beliefs passed down through generations, beliefs Jung hinted at when describing cultural complexes shaping collective attitudes toward emotion and identity. Now turning toward our third truth, which again might poke at some quiet assumptions, the idea that women inherently desire control over their surroundings deserves closer scrutiny too. This isn't about control in the stereotypical sense of dominance or manipulation. Rather, it's about how control intertwines with survival instincts shaped across history and reflected uniquely in modern contexts. Consider Mia, a 31-year-old freelance graphic designer living in Toronto who shared an interesting reflection recently. I realized my urge to plan every detail wasn't just about organization. It was a way to protect myself from unpredictability. That insight struck me because it reveals how behaviors often labeled negatively, as controlling or overly cautious, can stem from understandable needs rather than flaws. Jung wrote extensively on shadow aspects, the parts of ourselves we reject or hide because they seem unacceptable either personally or socially. For many women, and people generally, wanting control can become part of this shadow dynamic. Denied openly but expressed covertly when anxiety spikes around safety or autonomy. Mia's story highlights how recognizing these patterns can transform them from sources of shame into signals demanding attention rather than suppression. Here's an exercise connected to this truth. Reflect on moments when you felt compelled to control situations, maybe micromanaging projects at work or overplanning social gatherings, and ask yourself what fears underlie those actions. What would happen if you loosened your grip slightly? What emotions arise with that thought? Try experimenting with small releases, for instance, delegating one task without checking every detail obsessively, and observe your internal reactions without rushing to judge them as good or bad. This practice doesn't aim for perfection. Instead, it invites curiosity into how control functions within your psyche, a way toward embracing complexity instead of battling parts of yourself deemed undesirable by external standards. And here's the kicker. Recognizing control as a nuanced response rather than a simple flaw opens doors for deeper self-compassion. A quality much needed given cultural pressures women face balancing independence with relational expectations. I once had a friend named Lila in London who struggled fiercely with this duality. She'd pride herself on being independent yet felt guilty whenever life circumstances nudged her toward seeking support. Her breakthrough came not from sudden insight but gradual acceptance that needing stability, and thus some measure of control, is human and doesn't negate strength or growth. So perhaps what looks like contradiction here is just life refusing easy categorization. Wanting autonomy yet craving connection, desiring freedom yet fearing chaos. All true for many navigating social roles layered by history and individual experience alike. Before moving further into these tangled truths, take a moment now. Yes, right now, to consider your relationship with control. Where does it serve you? Where might it limit you? How might reframing these impulses change your interactions? If these reflections resonate at all, or clash wildly, I invite you to share thoughts below because unpacking such nuances collectively can illuminate corners often left dark individually. And since subtle shifts require tools beyond conversation alone, I put together some resources exploring practical ways to explore vulnerability and control through mindful exercises inspired by psychological principles, no jargon included. Feel free to check them out if curious. They're designed as gentle guides rather than prescriptions because real change rarely happens overnight anyway. But circling back now, it strikes me how both vulnerability and control intertwine within wider social narratives shaping expectations placed disproportionately on women today. From workplace roles demanding emotional labor quietly performed behind scenes to family dynamics coded by historical gender roles hardwired over centuries yet still morphing under contemporary stresses like economic uncertainty amplified post-pandemic. No wonder contradictions abound when external pressures pull one way while inner desires pull another. That tension itself isn't failure. It's evidence life refuses simplistic answers where complexity reigns supreme despite our craving for neatness. It makes me think again about those conversations with Anna and Elena. Their stories pointing toward resilience not as armor but as fluid dance between strength expressed vulnerably and careful navigation via measured control when needed. Here's where Jung's concept of integration shines. Not erasing conflicts within but weaving them into richer tapestries acknowledging multiple truths coexisting uneasily yet authentically within each person regardless of gender labels imposed externally. So much packed into these two truths alone, yet they barely scratch surface compared to full human experience swirling beneath everyday encounters usually glossed over by assumptions we barely question. Still, it seems fitting somehow not to rush conclusions but allow discomfort born from confronting these realities linger thoughtfully. As spaces inviting deeper inquiry beyond surface-level judgments so common around notions tied narrowly to women as category instead embracing whole messy spectrum everyone carries inside along different axes influenced by culture, personality, circumstance. And since keeping things too tidy feels unnatural here, let me confess I don't have all answers either, who does? But starting honest conversations like this, it matters immensely, even if only seeds planted today take root much later amidst unpredictable conditions life offers generously whether we're ready for them or not. Anyway, hope these reflections spark something new stirring somewhere inside. Even slight cracks forming in old walls built from shaky assumptions can be profound beginnings eventually reshaping how we relate to ourselves first then others more authentically over time. Commenta isua experiencia se any part touched a nerve. or felt strangely familiar, because unraveling illusions together feels lighter than carrying doubts silently alone. And hey, in case curiosity lingers, there's plenty more ahead, peeling layers off misconceptions grounded not in malice but habitual blind spots masked cleverly by culture itself. But for now, I'll leave you sitting gently with these two truths unfolding their complexities slowly yet insistently inside everyday lives where transformation quietly breathes amid contradictions stubbornly clinging close. Thanks for sticking around so far. I appreciate your open mind, willing venture beyond easy answers into richer territory, unfolding each moment anew. Let's ease into this last piece of the puzzle, not because it's simple, far from it, but because it offers a perspective that often slips under the radar yet profoundly shapes how we relate to women and, frankly, to ourselves. The final inconvenient truth I want to share is that beneath all societal roles and psychological archetypes lies an innate paradox. Women, like all humans, embody both creation and destruction, not in dramatic or violent senses necessarily, but as fundamental processes constantly shaping their identities and lives. This isn't about labeling women as destructive or nurturing stereotypes. Instead, think of these forces as natural rhythms within each person. Jung spoke about the necessity of embracing polarities within the psyche, how life demands cycles of building up and tearing down old patterns to allow new growth. For women, this may manifest in ways society rarely acknowledges openly, from breaking norms to redefine roles, dissolving outdated beliefs about themselves, or even confronting internalized oppressions that no longer serve. Consider Yasmin, a 38-year-old activist and poet living in Cape Town. She told me once how her journey involved dismantling inherited family expectations while fiercely creating new spaces for self-expression and community leadership. Yasmin described moments when she had to destroy parts of her identity tied to cultural conditioning to make room for authentic passions she'd long buried under layers of obligation. This duality, creation and destruction, isn't linear or tidy, it's messy, disorienting even. But it is essential for transformation. Trying to separate these processes leads only to stagnation or frustration because life itself doesn't pause comfortably between neat compartments labeled growth or decay. If this sounds abstract, here's a way to bring it home. Reflect on a time when you felt compelled to let go of something deeply familiar, perhaps a habit, belief, or relationship, to embrace something unknown or uncertain. How did that feel? Scary? Liberating? Both? Often we resist destruction out of fear without realizing how holding tightly actually prevents renewal. Here's an exercise I invite you to try. Identify one aspect in your life where you sense resistance toward change. Not just superficial changes but those touching core parts of identity or routine. Write down what fears arise when imagining letting that go. Then imagine what possibilities might emerge if you allowed yourself permission to destroy that block gently, not recklessly but with conscious intention. This practice isn't about sudden upheaval but cultivating awareness around cycles we naturally experience yet resist labeling honestly due to discomfort or societal judgment. Yasmin's story reminded me personally of a time living in Boston during winter 2022 when I faced letting go of a long-held professional identity after an unexpected layoff. Initially terrifying, like losing solid ground beneath feet, but gradually I realized the collapse invited exploration I hadn't dared before. So here we are at the edge, the threshold where the uncomfortable truths met earlier start weaving together more clearly. Complexity over simplicity. Strength found through vulnerability. Control intertwined with surrender. Creation inseparable from destruction. These themes challenge us not just intellectually but emotionally and experientially because they cut against grainy cultural narratives insisting on fixed definitions of gender roles, personalities, capacities. And maybe that's why facing these truths can feel like walking without a map into foggy terrain. Uncertain where footing will hold next but compelled forward nonetheless by desire for authenticity beyond illusions. I want to offer something that feels less like a tidy summary, which would betray the messiness, and more like an invitation. What if we stopped trying so hard to classify women, or anyone, as fitting neat categories defined by others? What if instead we leaned into paradoxes each person embodies rather than fearing them? What if authenticity was less about arriving at perfect answers and more about courageously asking hard questions without easy closures? This shift requires patience, Not the kind measured by calendars but deep endurance nurtured through openness and humility. A willingness to be wrong sometimes and surprised often. It calls for recognizing pain not as failure but signpost guiding toward deeper self-understanding. Emotions not as obstacles but messages coded by psyche yearning for integration beyond socially imposed scripts. Imagine relationships where expectations loosen enough so individuals show up fully with contradictions intact rather than performing roles shaped by fear of rejection or invisibility. That kind of connection fosters resilience built on truth rather than facade. A foundation better suited for navigating life's unpredictable currents whether personal or collective crises unfold unexpectedly, as they have repeatedly over recent years worldwide. Letting go of illusions also means embracing uncertainty, not as enemy but companion on path toward wholeness no matter how winding or rocky it appears at times. And yes, that path is lonely sometimes because society favors clear-cut definitions and quick judgments over ambiguity needing time to unfold meaningfully inside hearts and minds willing to listen patiently first then respond thoughtfully later. But with each moment spent acknowledging complexity instead of rejecting it outright, we inch closer toward spaces allowing healing old wounds etched by rigid beliefs long past their usefulness, making room finally for fresh understandings born from lived experience rather than inherited assumptions alone. So here's my quiet challenge for you now. How might your understanding of yourself or others shift if you embraced contradictions instead of fearing them? If vulnerability became strength recognized honestly rather than hidden behind masks built from expectation? If control surrendered partially not as defeat but as trust, in yourself and others, to navigate unknown terrains together? These aren't rhetorical questions meant simply for reflection but invitations inviting action small yet profound, conversations held differently, judgments paused momentarily, empathy extended beyond convenience boundaries. I don't claim having figured this out perfectly, far from it. In fact, embracing imperfection wholeheartedly feels like part of this messy truth itself, the beautiful tension between wanting clarity yet accepting mystery without rushing resolution prematurely. And so perhaps this is best left open-ended deliberately because closure would rob space needed for ongoing discovery alive inside each interaction lived authentically despite inherent contradictions present since birth right through unfolding future moments still unwritten now as you read this. What remains clear though is this. Dismantling illusions about women, or anyone, is less about tearing down others and more about dismantling our own preconceived notions limiting capacity for genuine encounter rooted in respect beyond stereotypes handed down unexamined across generations until now disrupted gently yet persistently through courageous questioning lived daily amid complexity surrounding us all today increasingly visible amid social shifts accelerating globally post-2020 pandemic realities marking new chapters still in progress collectively shaping who we become individually too often invisibly intertwined forever anew. So take that with you, not as burden, but seed planted lightly in fertile soil waiting patient seasons before blooming uniquely according your own timing blending growth mixed inevitably with decay necessary natural cycle inviting transformation ripe precisely because it resists simplistic explanation offered prematurely by eager minds craving certainty instead. Thanks deeply for journeying through these truths alongside me today. I hope they unsettle kindly enough provoke curiosity enough inspire subtle shifts whispering softly inside hearts ready even slightly now opening wider toward fuller encounter embracing complexities life generously offers freely amid chaos beauty intertwined inseparably always becoming ever more distinctly human uniquely yours truly. And remember, as much as we seek answers outside ourselves, the deepest knowing often arises quietly within when silence finally welcomes contradictions not feared but befriended gradually revealing richness hidden beneath surface illusions once held tight no longer necessary safe released tenderly unfolding endlessly before us all present imperfect perfectly real alive. That's the invitation lingering here now, in these final moments together. What will you choose next? Commenta I say this touched something deep inside you today. I'd love hearing your reflections honestly shared because conversation continues quietly transforming worlds far beyond single voices bravely spoken aloud. Until next time, keep walking courageously beyond illusions embracing full spectrum human experience bravely unfolding step by step no matter how unclear sometimes road ahead feels exactly where real change quietly begins.